Greetings from Tokyo, my dear friends. This is Daisuke, and I hope that you are all having a very nice day today. Please pardon this intrusion, but if you don't mind, I would like to talk to you about the films in the Criterion collection. Now, I have been trying to go through the films of the Criterion collection in spine number order. And so with that, I would like to talk to you about the film that is spine number 20. The film is from 1986, directed by the great Alex Cox. And the film is this, Sid and Nancy. And it's also on Blu-ray. This is the film that is about the relationship between two people named Sid Vicious and Nancy Spungen, played by Gary Oldman and Chloe Webb, respectively. Now, for those of you who are familiar with the British punk rock scene from the late 70s, and in particular the Sex Pistols, you will obviously be very familiar with those names, as well as being familiar with the Sex Pistols, obviously. So this is a film that I would say is not directly about the Sex Pistols per se, but it is about the relationship between these people who are very prominent or do otherwise figure in with respect to the, how shall I put it, the background or the history of the Sex Pistols. And therefore, this is a so-called period piece set in that time. It's set, the first half being in the United Kingdom, and the second half taking place in the United States, where the two of them, Sid and Nancy, Sid was touring, and then later on they decided to move into the Hotel Chelsea in New York. So this film is essentially about their very tumultuous relationship, and I think the fact that the film was originally planned to be called Love Kills, and in fact you can see the title Love Kills here appearing pretty nicely on the cover art of the Blu-ray of Criterion. The fact that it was planned to be called Love Kills, I think, says a lot, and it says a lot about the way that the relationship is being depicted here, and I'd like to go into more detail about that later. But before I do, let me just talk about this wonderful release by Criterion, spine number 20. Now, for those of you who knew this release, this was the DVD release of Sid and Nancy, and it was a very fine release in my opinion, because it had the release had the, let me put it here, this release had the film presented in 1.75 to 1 aspect ratio. Now that's a key difference, because the new Blu-ray presents the film in 1.85 to 1 aspect ratio. So there's one difference already in terms of the presentation. But there are other features that are the same. There's the behind-the-scenes kind of documentary called England's Glory, so you can see Alex Cox and various members of the cast and crew just kind of having fun and enjoying themselves on the set. And so that's a really great documentary, and that's carried over to this Blu-ray. And then we have the really famous or infamous television interview from the UK from 1976 with Bill Grundy, right, with the Sex Pistols, and I think part of the the Bromley contingent, and that was a very infamous one indeed, and it was just so emblematic of what the Sex Pistols were all about. And so this is on the DVD, and it's also on the Blu-ray. Then there is the really interesting telephone interview from, I think it was 1978, and that's here, and it's also here, and it's a telephone interview that Sid Vicious gave with Roberta Bailey, the photographer. And so very interesting. Again, it's another aspect of the real life Sid Vicious. So this is truly I think it's a nice glimpse into what Sid Vicious was, kind of where he was at this particular point in time. And as you know, 1978 is a very critical year for him. Then there is the actual interview that was made, or that was Nancy Spungen and Sid Vicious actually gave. Well, actually, you can probably say Sid Vicious wasn't really being interviewed in that, because he was pretty out of it, but it was mostly Nancy Spungen that was giving the interview. So there's a great interview clip from DOA Rite of Passage, which is the Lech Kowalski piece. And so that is carried over. That's on the DVD. It's also carried over here. And that is a key special feature, because it's showing the actual Nancy Spungen and Sid Vicious, how they were, or at least how they were portraying themselves, or how they seemed to be on camera. And it appears like, for all intents and purposes, that's who they really were. And it was it's just it's really yeah, it's really great to see. So it's really lovely to have that here. So that's the interview with Vicious and Nancy Spungen from the DOA Rite of Passage from 1980. And then there is the commentary. The commentary here, and I just want to get everything right here. So the commentary track, which is really great, it is, let's see, yes, the co-screenwriter, who is Abby Wool, and then there's Gary Oldman and Chloe Webb, and then Grio Marcus, who is a music historian, and also Julian Temple and Lech Kowalski. Now, Julian Temple is a very a key figure in Sex Pistols, and also Lech Kowalski is a huge, he's a filmmaker, and he made DOA Rite of Passage. Very, very knowledgeable. And then Elliot Kidd, musician Elliot Kidd, so talking about reminiscing about Sid Vicious and Chloe Webb. Very great audio commentary track, I should say, which is carried over to the Blu-ray. Fantastic, fantastic. But let's then focus on the Blu-ray here. So we have all these features that are carried over, but what else is added? So we've got a new commentary track with filmmaker Alex Cox, and then the actor Andrew Schofield. And Andrew Schofield was the gentleman who was playing Johnny Rotten. So really, really great. I love how this new commentary track from Cox and Schofield is a nice counterweight to the earlier commentary track. It's nice to hear the two of them talk and reminisce and just have a good time watching this film, and be just be very lively and effervescent, if you will. It's a lovely commentary. And then the other addition is there's an interview, one-on-one interview given with Alex Cox, and it's I don't know, I love Alex Cox so much. I think the more I am able to hear him talk about films and about his films as well, the happier I am. And he's always so clear and very honest, and he's also very especially about this work, Sid and Nancy, he is so he gives such a great critical assessment of his own work, and he also very interestingly provides a nice response, if you will, because Johnny Rotten, John Lydon, seems to have written in the past about how he apparently was not very happy with the film Sid and Nancy, part because he claimed that the filmmakers never met him until after the film was over. Well, the interview suggests quite the contrary, that Alex Cox and the actor Schofield, who was eventually going to play Johnny Rotten, they had actually met him in a hotel in New York before the film was actually going to be made. So it was actually during the casting process, I think. So, and actually it was very interesting because according to Cox in the interview, it was actually during those preliminary meetings, especially between Lydon and Schofield, the actor, that it was decided, or it was suggested, that Lydon actually gave his blessing to have Schofield play Johnny Rotten not as a Londoner per se, but more as a Scouser or as a Liverpudlian, someone from Liverpool. So I think that's a very interesting difference. Now, I'm not from the United Kingdom, so I don't get those nuanced differences immediately, but I do understand and appreciate, at least from let's say from a distance. I can appreciate the fact that there are differences there, and I think those differences matter very much. I wish I could catch them, of course, but according to the interview from by Alex Cox here, that is where the inspiration was to play Johnny Rotten in the film, to play Lydon with more of a Scouser element to him, and thus therein was an aspect of the filmmaking which was not necessarily to make the film as an accurate historical depiction of the Sex Pistols necessarily, but to have a little bit of artistic license or a little bit of artistic freedom. And I love the word Alex Cox uses here, which is sentimentalization. To use that in order to not necessarily show a straight and historically accurate depiction of the Sex Pistols per se, but emit a kind of atmosphere or feeling, artistically based one, of the Sex Pistols and what they were about, as a means of telling the story about Sid and Nancy. And I thought it was just a mind-blowingly fabulous interview. It's one of the great supplements of Criterion, in my opinion. Then there is an excerpt from a British TV show. It's called London Weekend Show, and this was an episode that was broadcast in November 1976 about the Sex Pistols, and also broadly about the punk rock scene at the time. It's a very nice time capsule type of historical document, if you will, about the punk rock scene. And it's very helpful for me because I'm not necessarily an expert in British punk, but it's really interesting. And then there is an excerpt from Sad Vacation. It's a documentary from 2016 about Spungen and Vicious, and it's really about basically it talks, it's not, the excerpt is not very long, but it talks about, very briefly, about the backgrounds of these two, where they came from, and also then it goes very specifically into the final night, or at least when they were staying in the Hotel Chelsea, and what happened that led up to the unfortunate and very tragic events that occurred. And so this is a very interesting documentary, or at least excerpt, which is, again, something that is something that is very helpful for me, because I'm not necessarily an expert in the punk rock scene, although I do know, just generally speaking, about Sid Vicious and Nancy Spungen. And then there is the essay called The Horrible Purity of Immorality by John Savage. And then also there is On Sid and Nancy and Sid and Nancy. This is material that is sort of assembled by Alex Cox, which draws from interviews that Cox made around the time of making Sid and Nancy. The John Savage interview, I'm sorry, the John Savage essay actually appears in the leaflet of the DVD right here. And also, it also appears on the back of the Laserdisc. This is the Sid and Nancy Laserdisc, and this is Laserdisc spine number 241. And the essay actually appears titleless, but it appears starting from here, starting from here, and then it continues into the inside, like so. Look at that. Isn't that great? That is really great. And I should say also that the Laserdisc is very interesting because it has the England's Glory documentary, it has the Bill Grundy interview, it has the telephone interview with Vicious, it has the commentary track, which was by Abby Wool and Gary Oldman and Chloe Webb and Greer Marcus and Julian Temple and Lech Kowalski and Elliot Kidd. But it also has, in addition, and these are features which I don't think are carried over even onto the Blu-ray, but it has the photo essay with commentary by the tour photographer for the Sex Pistols, Bob Gruen. And also, it has the music video of the song Love Kills, Joe Strummer, Love Kills. So I thought that was great. I don't think it's on here, right? It's not on this Blu-ray, is it? Not even as an Easter egg, I think. But okay, so let me now say that I want to talk about the specifics of this film. So if you haven't seen the film, please, I urge you to turn off this video now and go and watch Sid and Nancy, and then come back, and then we can talk about certain details or spoilerish details about this film. I cannot wait to talk to you about Alex Cox's Sid and Nancy. Okay, you're back. So I'm assuming you've seen the film, and I don't know, what do you think? What do you think of Sid and Nancy? I must tell you from the outset that I am far from being any kind of expert in punk rock and British punk in particular. I do know it, but just very generally. I don't follow too much of the details of the Sex Pistols, although I do know the general gist, the general background, if you will. And so, but I don't know many of the details. For instance, if you listen to the great commentary that is by Abby Wool and Julian Temple and Lech Kowalski and Gary Oldman and Chloe Webb and others, that commentary is great because, for instance, you'll get little snippets of information about how, during this live event, actually this is what happened, or another thing like when, or that's what happened, or this wasn't really how it turned out, or those sorts of things. So I wasn't in any way prepared to watch the film, and I still am not prepared to watch the film and scrutinize every single aspect of the film to see where it differs from the actual events of the Sex Pistols and Sid Vicious and Nancy Spungen. So I'm not in that camp, or I'm not in that level of expertise at all. But I do know, and I do appreciate that this film is, in the great words of Alex Cox, a kind of sentimentalization of the story that was the relationship, the real-life relationship between Sid Vicious and Nancy Spungen. And so I think this kind of aspect is really, really great. And I love how the film focuses on the relationship. It shows the highs, it certainly shows the lows, and it shows the very rocky, turbulent, very intense, and very tender relationship between these two. I love first and foremost, I think I love the performances by Gary Oldman and Chloe Webb. They are really remarkable. Let me talk about Gary Oldman first as Sid Vicious. what I love about him is well, there is, of course, with the two of them, there is this uncanny physical resemblance to the actual real-life people. And it's one of those physical resemblances that it's not 100%, there's not 100% physical resemblance, obviously, but it's close enough that as the film progresses, you really accept that these two are Sid and Nancy. It's amazing. And they're just some reenactments and recreations of certain mannerisms that are fantastic. I think one of the highlights is My Way. It has to be My Way, and just the performance is really wonderful, and also the musical performances in general that were depicted here by the Sex Pistols and then by Sid Vicious in the U.S. I thought they were really quite great, and I think the audio commentary track actually complements the performances by suggesting that the actors are really getting into the performances, and it was really great. Incidentally, before I move on, I should note that according to Alex Cox, the musical number sections of the film were handled, at least under the musical direction of none other than Glenn Matlock. So that's very interesting. So Glenn Matlock had a hand in the musical direction of the musical scenes, or the performance scenes of the film Sid and Nancy. And Alex Cox then revealed that during those performances, or as part of the production of those performances, it was actually Glenn Matlock who was playing the bass. And that's Glenn Matlock's bass that you hear as we see Gary Oldman as Sid Vicious performing. And obviously performing rather badly, because, as you know, Sid Vicious was not a good bassist at all. And so I love Alex Cox when he says it was almost like Glenn Matlock was sort of having his revenge, if you will, against Sid Vicious, because, as you know, Glenn Matlock was forced to leave the band, and he was replaced by Sid Vicious. And Glenn Matlock was probably a much better musician, a much better performer or a bassist than Sid Vicious. So it was almost like, you know, Glenn Matlock had to play purposefully badly for the tracks that were used on the musical performance numbers here in Sid and Nancy, where Sid Vicious is shown playing the bass. I thought it was really... So, anyway, getting back to Gary Oldman, the performances, I think, are another aspect of the overall package of his tour de force here. He gives it all. He is, and I don't quite know how he does it, but I think he does it in a way that only Gary Oldman can do. He shows a really almost turbulent side, but it's so... It's like he's like a lost puppy, and that he doesn't have any guidance. He needs someone to tell him what to do, and that's where Nancy comes in. And therefore, you have the lovely and unfortunately self-destructive interdependence between these two characters. And so I think Gary Oldman's performance is really lovely here. He shows the innocence of a child, if you like, and also just being swept up in things, but also just really having a true regard for what Nancy was about and how Nancy played into his life. And so I think that is something to be said for the performance, and I think that's very critical in allowing us to get into the relationship between Sid and Nancy. Then, of course, we have the great performance by Chloe Webb as Nancy Spungen. Now, I love this performance for so many reasons. Nancy was a very unique individual, and I think Chloe really captures that uniqueness to a T. And Chloe Webb is obviously just a fantastic actor of the highest caliber. Obviously, according to the background, she was so devoted to playing Nancy that that's her in the body bag at the beginning of the film. That's real dedication, I must admit. And so that's just an example of how great she is. And her voice is so key here. You know, I think Nancy, as depicted by Chloe Webb, is so devoted to Sid and really wants to be so much a part of Sid's life that I think that's such a wonderful aspect of her character on the one hand. On the other hand, she is very annoying to a lot of people around her and are in that inner circle. And so I think that is expressed so well in how she shouts and how she screams and how her voice can become very grating and irritating and quite annoying to the ear, quite annoying to listen to. And I thought that was such a great performance. And according to accounts of the actual Nancy Spungen, this is not at all an inaccurate depiction, as far as I understand it to be. So well done to Chloe Webb for capturing that balance between trying to create a sympathetic portrayal of Nancy, while on the other hand also portraying her as being a little bit irritating to those around her. And I think that thus makes the relationship between her and Sid, between Nancy and Sid, all the more, how should I put it, in their own world, or hermetically sealed, as it were. And as the film progresses, we realize that they are it becomes less and less about the world around them and more just about the two of them. And so I think that has a lot to do with how the performances are being presented here in this film. It's fantastic. Just so many great things about the two of them. Oh yes, I should say before I go on, I think one of my favorite moments is, again, going back to My Way, the look on her face when she's in the audience and she is watching Gary Oldman, Sid, performing My Way. The look on her face of just absolute love is so beautiful for me. And then she gets shot, and she is almost happy that she is being shot. And I think that is the perfect encapsulation, the perfect embodiment, if you will, of I think what the film is trying to be getting at with respect to this relationship, right? After all, love kills, and she's so devoted to him that she wants almost to die, as it were. At least the film's depiction of Nancy, because that part of the film is obviously a kind of a fantasy. And also the idea that links into what the film then depicts about the relationship, about her wanting to create a kind of love-suicide pact with Sid, at least as depicted in the film. And I find that to be just as an artistic expression of what the filmmakers are trying to depict Nancy as being all about. I find that to be so compelling, so amazing, so frightening, and so chilling at the same time. And thus, it's the perfect embodiment, I think, of the whole meaning of the phrase, love kills. There are other aspects of this film that are wonderful. Before I move on, I just want to say, what about the farewell drugs, right? Or what is it? I want to go naughty blinkums. So I think, and there's so many others. So I think that there's just a lovely dialogue and rapport, and the script is really well fashioned here in this respect. But I understand that things like I want to go naughty blinkums, I think that was something that, according to Gary Oldman, that was something that he said when he was a little child. So that probably could have been an ad lib. So I'm not sure about that. We might have to ask Alex Cox and Abby Wool about that one day. Speaking of Alex Cox here, let me say that some of his choices, or I would say almost all of his choices, or all of his choices here, I think, are just genius. They're absolute genius. And let me say from the outset, I think the framing is absolute genius, because we start with the death, or the reporting of the death of Nancy Spungen, or at least when the police arrive at the Hotel Chelsea. And we don't see the act happening. We see that at the end, but we just see the results or the aftermath. And then the film then goes to the past, and it goes to the past and then back to England, and where we have John Lydon, or Johnny Rotten, and Sid Vicious together, and then that's where we see the meeting of Sid and Nancy. And also we see the various figures of Sex Pistols, Malcolm, John, and others, but we do get the atmosphere of the Sex Pistols and punk. But again, this is not necessarily a film that is about the Sex Pistols, and this is going back to what I was referring to earlier, which is that Alex Cox seems to be wanting not to go for a full, direct historical depiction of the Sex Pistols necessarily, but instead going for an artistic expression, a sentimentalization, if you will, of what that period was about, as a backdrop for telling the story between Sid and Nancy. And so then as the film progresses, we see less and less of the sort of Sex Pistols stuff, and we get more focus on Sid and Nancy until by the end, after they've gone to New York and after they've settled into the Hotel Chelsea, it's really all about just the two of them. By this time, all the figures from the earlier Sex Pistols past are no longer there. It's all about the two of them and their love and their drugs and their drug-induced stupors and their visions, right? The very famous one about they're just in a daze, and it just creates this unfortunate self-destructive bent towards it. I think most ominously shown by the fact that they're in the bed and the fire is going and they're just looking at the fire, and they don't realize that it's a very dangerous situation, and it's both oddly and eerily romantic, but of course, first and foremost, it's utterly frightening. It just shows the destructive nature of it. And so therefore the film then not necessarily shifts, but then it becomes this film that is focused on them and their unfortunate encounters with drugs. And so does it glorify drug use, or does it condemn drug use? I would say it's more of the latter, because it does show the unfortunate aftermath of what happened. And it also has that wonderful scene, if you remember, in the methadone, in the clinic, with the actor Cy Richardson. And he's really putting down the two of them for wasting their lives with drugs. And Alex Cox and Abby Wool actually go further by saying that they really wanted this to be an anti-drug movie, and they didn't want to romanticize drug use. And I think Abby Wool, in one of her comments in the commentary, had said that, according to what she remembered, Nancy Reagan, who at the time was First Lady of the United States, had this campaign of don't do drugs. And so I think, according to Abby Wool, Nancy Reagan seemed to champion the anti-drug aspect of Sid and Nancy. And so if that's the case, then I think for Abby Wool and her maybe punk aesthetic roots, so to speak, I think probably that is somewhat abhorrent, because the last thing one wants to be associated with is the authority in Nancy Reagan. But I think the point being is that I think from Abby Wool's point of view and from Alex Cox's point of view, this is supposed to be an anti-drug film, or an anti-drug film, so to speak. And so I really see that. And I thus find the ending of the film, which is not in any way a depiction of Sid Vicious's death. We only see a glimpse of Sid Vicious in jail, right, immediately after he has been arrested for the suspected murder of Nancy Spungen. But we don't see his actual death, right? From there we get this sort of vision of him crossing, going to heaven, I think, and he's just having a little bite, and he's doing the little disco dance with the kids, and then he sees the car come up, and who's in the car but none other than his love, Nancy Spungen, and so they ride off into heaven. So we don't see the full gritty aftermath of what really happened to him. And let me just add that there's that real eerie, chilling shot of him walking across the landscape, and you can see the cloudy, almost dreary landscape, and you can see in the distance the two towers of the World Trade Center. It's really a beautiful, breathtaking, eerie shot. But the point here is that this is a way of depicting the two of them basically being happy and being happy forever after, so to speak. So we don't necessarily see them, or we don't leave them in the way that they really are, which is dead in this really terrible way. So we don't get that. And so perhaps that can be seen as a kind of sentimentalization that goes over into the romantic too much, in favor of the romantic, instead of depicting the real life effects of intense drug use. Right. And I think Alex Cox goes so far as to acknowledge this point in his interview, and so I don't begrudge him or Abby Wool or any of the filmmakers for having this choice, because it is a way of ending the film, and it does put focus on the fact that these two really, at least as they're depicted in the film, they were really into each other so much. And so what better way to end the film than to show them together, right? I mean, they are dead. Both of them are dead, but to show them together and then just leave the film as it is. So I don't know. I think the ending, for what it is, I think it doesn't have enough of the anti-drug aspect of it, but at the same time, I don't think it has to, because there's enough in the film already to show how much it really is terrible to take all these drugs, you know. But in other words, as a film and as an artistic work, the ending, I think, is a nice touch. And therefore, it shouldn't be taken, obviously, as being a direct historical depiction of what actually happened. And I don't think it's meant to, and I don't think the filmmakers intended that, and I don't think that was their intention, obviously so. And so in that sense, the ending really works. I should say also about the actual depiction of the death of Nancy. Now, of course, there is a lot of speculation about what really happened. What really happened here? We don't know, and I don't know. I do know a little bit of the background about what could have happened, but again, I'm not an expert. So what the film does is it essentially depicts the event as being really a kind of a tussle between the two of them, and that was a little bit of an argument, and that there was a knife involved, and there was no intentional stabbing necessarily, but there was a tussle in which ended up leading to Nancy being very seriously injured. But neither she nor Sid realized the extent of her injury at the time, and so after she was stabbed in this tussle, then they went to bed and they were just kind of sleeping, and then later she wakes up and she's really now losing a lot of blood, and she realizes she's in pain, and so she goes to the bathroom, and Sid is still sleeping, and then unfortunately she's in the bathroom, and then she falls dead. And then Sid later wakes up and then sees the blood on the bed, and then just sees Nancy and discovers what happens. So this depiction is one of, again, it seems like it was a result of just one of those basically those interactions between the two of them, that there was no intentional foul play that was at work here, at least as it was depicted in the film. And so this is very interesting, right? Because this really suggests that their relationship was, of course, very physical, very intense, and it was always one that I think was bordering on intense devotion to each other on the one hand, and also intense danger against each other on the other hand. But the danger was never on purpose, and I think this the way in which Nancy's death is depicted is, again, another wonderful metaphoric expression of this idea of the intense danger that was never on purpose, so to speak, because they would never intentionally want to kill each other. I mean, at least as they were depicted in the film. I think the musician Elliot Kidd, I think on the commentary said as much. You know, they were so much in love. Sid loved Nancy so much he would never want to kill her. Right. So, and also in that interview clip in DOA Rite of Passage that's included in the Criterion collection, right? Nancy Spungen says, what does she say here? Sid would have died 15 deaths if I hadn't been around. So there is a real, almost, dare I say, deluded devotion that the two of them have towards each other. And when I say deluded, I mean that with the utmost sincerity and respect, because it has to be deluded, because it ended up leading to the death of Nancy. And so it's really unfortunate and very tragic. And you can tell because Sid is obviously crushed when the police come and he realizes what happens. But also, again, it's capped off by that ending, which is showing Sid and Nancy riding off into heaven or wherever it is they're going to go. And so even in death, they are devoted to each other. So this is the premise upon which that very intense encounter in the Hotel Chelsea that led to Nancy's death is being depicted. And so this is, for me, something that is, again, I think, even as I think the filmmakers would acknowledge, it's a very controversial aspect of the film. It is one of the aspects that is, I think, still being discussed, what really happened. And so I don't want to talk about the various theories as to what could have happened that led to Nancy's death, but I just want to say that as a film, this really is consistent with how the relationship between Sid and Nancy is being portrayed here. And I really admire the filmmakers for that, very much so. And they're tackling what is a very, very controversial matter, and they're doing it with a lot of tact and a lot of responsibility. I should say also that Abby Wool made a really astute comment on the commentary track, which I really admire her for. I really admire Abby Wool for this, amongst her work here in general, of course, but also for this comment. And I'm paraphrasing, of course. She said that, of course, she was aware of the controversy surrounding Nancy's death, and she was aware of the possibility that Nancy could have been killed by someone other than Sid. But as a film, as a script, as a story, she and Alex Cox decided to depict the film where Sid was the one that was, let's say, responsible for the death of Nancy. He didn't intentionally mean to kill her, right? But it was maybe certain events that that he was involved in caused her death. So what Abby Wool says on the commentary is, if it was really the case that she was killed by someone else, that she was killed by someone other than Sid Vicious, then she feels really bad, because she feels therefore that if that's the case, then the film essentially vindicates that person, because it depicts the death as being essentially, you know, something that the two of them did, or Sid did, by accident. It doesn't show the killer, right? So if there is a third party that was involved in the death of Nancy, then Abby Wool says that, you know, there is a kind of a heavy toll, because the film is really vindicating that, and is really allowing, I think in her words, and I'm paraphrasing, allowing a murderer to go free, so to speak. And I really appreciate her candor here, and I take that to be, from her point of view, a veiled self-criticism. And if that's the case, I really respect and admire her for that, because I think it takes a lot to say that, and it's really the best, I think, most humble approach that one can take when dealing with such a controversial and so fundamentally important scene as that scene was in Sid and Nancy. It's really great. I really admire her for that, and Alex Cox as well for that choice. And it's really quite a brave choice. Again, this is not at all a film about the Sex Pistols. It is not a film about the Sex Pistols. It is a film about Sid and Nancy. And with that, I think as a Sex Pistols film, I don't think it's that good a film. And it's a little bit unsatisfactory. Of course, it's great to see a lot of these elements, don't get me wrong. And as I said, I'm not an expert in the Sex Pistols, but I do like them very much. But if you're looking for this is what happened here, this is what happened here, then I think there will be a little bit of a disappointment. And I think the audio commentary, the earlier commentary, really does address these points really, really well. Very well indeed, much more than I could ever dare to even comprehend. But let me just bring up one point. You know, there's a scene on the roof somewhere where the Sid and Nancy are playing like toy guns, and there's some kids there as well. And Sid is wearing a hammer and sickle T-shirt, right? But according to Julian Temple, he would never have worn a hammer and sickle T-shirt. He would have worn a swastika T-shirt. He would have worn a swastika T-shirt. And in fact, if you want to look at an example of the kind of swastika T-shirt that Sid would have worn, just take a look at the supplementary material, the interview, the DOA rite of passage interview between Nancy and Sid. Well, it's actually really Nancy who's doing most of the talking, and Sid's just sitting there. I think he's either asleep or stoned or something. But he is wearing a swastika T-shirt. And so that would have been the T-shirt that he should have worn on that scene on the rooftop instead of the hammer and sickle, but at least according to Julian Temple. And Julian Temple has some other great wardrobe detail faux pas in other parts of the film. I think he talks about a costume that the actor Andrew Schofield was wearing as John Lydon, Johnny Rotten, and Julian Temple, saying, he would never have worn something like that or something. So, but again, those are just little details of things that, at least according to people who were there, as they say on the commentary, these are things that, they would never have done. They would never have done this, or this is not what happened. So in that sense, I think this shouldn't be taken as being an attempt at accurately depicting what the Sex Pistols were about and what happened. But again, to go back to Alex Cox, who is Alex Cox and Abby Wool, right? This is their brainchild, so to speak, and under Alex Cox's direction, and how he directed the actors here, Gary Oldman and Chloe Webb, obviously. This is an artistic expression, in his words, a sentimentalization of the story between Sid and Nancy. And so I think in that sense, if one can look at this film through that lens, you're in for a real treat indeed. Okay, my friends, let me end there, and I hope that you enjoyed this discussion of Sid and Nancy. Again, it's just my own opinion, and I'm no expert in the Sex Pistols, so I really apologize if my discussion might have seemed a little bit incomplete in your eyes. If you have any thoughts, comments, or questions, of course, please feel free to leave them below at any time. At any time, I'd be very happy to read them and to engage in conversation with you. The next film that I plan to talk about is Spine number 21, which is here, Dead Ringers. And I have another copy here, which is sealed. So, until then, my friends, please be happy and healthy and well. And please, please, please keep on watching a lot of great, great movies. Until we meet again, my friends. Cheers.